Welcome to Wider View, the program that provides perspectives on the news outside the narrow confines of the mainstream media. I'm your host, Charles Dunaway. I'm happy to welcome Jim Kavanagh back to Wider View. Jim lives in New York City when he's not escaping contagion by coronavirus, and he blogs at thepolemicist.net. Jim is a regular guest on the Critical Hour podcast and the Loud and Clear podcast, both of which are featured on Sputnik Radio. So welcome back, Jim Kavanagh.
Thank you for having me, Charles.
So it's been an eventful and depressing few weeks for people on the political left of the United States. I mean, we had this sudden thrust of Joe Biden to the top of the pack in the primaries. Then Bernie Sanders suspended his campaign, and then Bernie endorsed Biden unequivocally. And, there's a lot to talk about, but maybe we should start with Bernie Sanders himself. There seems to be a big difference between the image that Sanders has among his followers during the campaign and the man himself. Would you agree, or how do you see it?
Well, probably for many of his followers, look, I supported the Sanders campaign because I supported the program and the policies and the platform that he had. But I certainly had no illusion about what was likely to happen and almost certain to happen. And nobody should have fooled themselves, and they were fooling themselves if they didn't think that Bernie Sanders was going to endorse the Democratic nominee, whoever that was. He said that. He promised that. Mm-hmm. He's a man of his word. We all saw the weaknesses of Sanders in 2016. He will not, would not, will not, did not go after his Democratic opponents the way he would go after a Republican on the same issues. You see it again and again. If he talks to a Republican about it, he's going after them very well. But once he's up there on the stage with the Democrats, he backs off from hard-hitting critiques. And he certainly did that with Joe Biden, which, he didn't go after, whom he didn't go after at all. Now, there was a time during which it seemed like Biden was out of it, so it might have seemed to the Sanders campaign it wasn't worth going after him. I could understand that. But, at the end of the day, he just won't do it. He won't do it. And his commitment, at the end of the day, is what many millions of people in the United States are, which is you cannot get out of the two-party framework. Any Democrat must be supported against any Republican. Mm-hmm. There's no deal breaker for that. No. And he said that all along. So the only hope with the Bernie Sanders campaign for people like me was that he would win or that he would get close to winning and really have an effect on the political process. Now, everything just blew up on that. The pandemic blew that up. But also what blew that up was what, again, did it in 2016. There was a lot of hinky stuff with the voting. And it was hinky stuff in 2016, and he wouldn't go after that either. No. We need to interrogate seriously the problems with the electronic voting and with the electoral system in general. It's designed for fraud, and we don't know what happens in a lot of these places. It's impossible to audit these votes. So all kinds of things went into this. And, of course, there was an incredible tsunami of media vitriol against Sanders from, the Democratic-aligned media, CNN and MSNBC. So he had a lot of things to put up with. We can lay on him the fact that he didn't push back against those things strongly enough, and he didn't, and he won't. Nobody should be surprised that he did what he did. He did what he said he was going to do. People who thought he wouldn't do that were kidding themselves. Right. And, if we are going to criticize him then for supporting the Democrats, then we have to criticize the whole paradigm that there's no alternative to the Democratic Party. You must work within the Democratic Party. And, any Democrat must be supported over any Republican.
I think that's where a lot of Sanders supporters right now are stuck because it seems the sort of Democrat that we are asked to support in Joe Biden is one who like with Hillary Clinton 4 years ago, is somebody who is completely opposed and has a long track record of being opposed to all the issues that we keep saying are so important to us. You know, whether it's Medicare for all or end to student debt or, you know, cutting out the regime change wars or any of that kind of stuff. I mean, we end up, we must support this person who is opposed to everything we say we believe in, or else this other person who's even worse will get elected. I don't know about you, but my Facebook posts I'm reading are full of this argument. It always pushes me back into the corner of saying, well, there's something wrong here. And because at least for 40 years, progressives have been trying to take over the Democratic Party. And the result seems to be that the party has moved further to the right.
There's a real problem. First of all, it's true. And I don't see how anybody, I think this year just demonstrates this enormously. You know, Sanders was the best bet you're ever going to have. The situation is the best situation you're ever going to have. They went out, the Democratic Party went out full blast. And it's aligned media. Always got to say, this is very important. Mm-hmm. It really does have an aligned media apparatus now that works for it. They went all out to stop this. The Democratic Party is never going to be a vehicle for the progressive left, for anything left. You know, it's not going to be. I think the most honest people will actually acknowledge that at this point. But they're going on still with, but the Republicans, but Trump. There's two things to say about that. One is, first of all, that's also, they have built up this image of Trump as a supervillain, which, you know, he's an ass. And, I'm going to be, you know, he's a jerk. He's an asshole. Everybody knows it. It's terrible he's the president. But, you know, he's really kind of a weak president who's got people around him who actually run the show at the end of the day. You know, and you can't pay attention to anything he says because they'll say the opposite the next day. So there's a lot of stuff about Trump that is really just his style, and people are aesthetically displeased with him for good reasons. But so what's the policies that are going to happen are going to be bad, whether it's Trump or Biden, and the differences between them are not going to be as great as anybody thinks. But you do have a situation that I don't quite know how we get over, which is that the American electoral system is locked in between the Democrats and the Republicans. Okay, mm-hmm. So there is it's illogic, but there's a fairness to saying, you know, there's only two there, so it's a zero-sum game. So if you don't vote for one, you're allowing the other to get in. And everybody has to take responsibility for the sense in which that's true. I'm not going to argue with anybody. You must not vote. You know what I mean? You're required not to vote. I won't put any guilt tripping on anybody with that because I can understand their reasons for doing that. But I won't accept any guilt tripping the other way around either. I'm not required to vote. And it's a statement and a political statement that has to be made. I think in fact we have to. Nothing's going to change by virtue of peaceful means in this country if we don't change the electoral system to allow ranked choice voting, to allow third parties to participate in a way that's significant. Otherwise, we are stuck within this, and everybody's going to be making a Hobson's choice that is bad. You know, you're going to vote for a horrible reactionary Democrat who, on every level, he's as big a liar, he's as big a sexist, he's as big a racist. His history is as bad as worse politically. He's actually, been in the political arena, in the legislative arena, doing bad things for decades. Mass incarceration, everything. So you're either going to vote just because they're a Democrat, just because they're not Trump. And if that's the calculus you make it. On the other hand, you can't be bad, guilt-tripping people who don't want to make that calculus and who want to say, I don't want to get involved in that debate. I want to change our focus and attention to something else, which we have to change that structure. If we don't start changing that structure, then we're going to be blocked in that forever. And as you say, and as we've seen, it's a race to the right. Every 4 years, you go further and further right. And it's fine, I'm writing a thing about this now, and I go back to articles that I saw that friends of mine wrote, and Daniel Ellsberg wrote in 2012, Obama versus Romney. And they're all going, Ellsberg and my friend Tom Gallagher, oh yeah, Obama is terrible. Not just bad, he's terrible. My friend Tom Gallagher wrote an article called, You Must Vote for the War Criminal. And it's important to vote for the war criminal. And they're saying, oh, but Romney would be catastrophically worse. What did Obama do? He instituted Mitt Romney's health care plan.
Yeah.
I mean, you can say there'll be differences, and there might be, but they end up not being catastrophically different because the forces that are at play really that drive the decisions are not these politicians and these figures that have come up, but the class forces and the class factions that are behind the scenes that don't want things to be too upset, etc. So anyway, it was Obama and Biden who tried to cut Social Security, and Biden has decades of that. So who's going to be worse? It's going to be worse on some levels. We know that. People can make their decisions about voting. Voting isn't that important to me. And that's the point. And nobody's can come back to me and say, oh, but it is that important, and you must, and it's your responsibility, and you're irresponsible, as Bernie said, if you don't. No, I'm not. I'm just making a different political choice. I won't say to you, you're being irresponsible or you're being immoral if you vote for Biden, but it's a different political choice, and we should look at what's at stake in making those different political choices.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm struck by a couple of things. Crystal Ball on the Rising on the Hill, who said a couple of days ago that basically it's our vote. If our vote is the only power we have, then giving it up is really not a very good tactic to use. And, it's struck me for many years. I mean, the Democratic Party has no reason to move left because the left is always in the end going to vote for them anyway. So, if they don't need to satisfy the left, they go satisfy the right. They go satisfy their suburban soccer mom. I mean, I think what she was grappling with is whether there is a way to use our vote in any kind of meaningful way to bring about the change we want.
Okay. Yeah, I don't know if you've seen this Lawrence O'Donnell clip where he says back in the day, he's very strongly, he says, when I worked in the Senate, I don't know what the Congress was, we never had to listen to the left. You don't listen to people if they're going to vote for you anyway. The only way you're going to get listened to is if you threaten to withhold your vote. That's the only way. And that's the case. So that's the truth. And your question is, how do we use our vote in a way? And it is like saying your labor,
Yeah.
You use your labor by striking. If someone's going to pay you a penny an hour, you don't go to work. You strike. You know what I mean? And my position, and I wrote a long thing about this in 2016, because the electoral system is so bad, it's corrupted by money, but also the mechanics of how the votes are cast and counted are completely designed for fraud, okay? You do not have a reasonable certainty in many, many places that your vote will be counted for whom it is cast. That's why it's even irrelevant to vote for a third party, because they can take those third party votes and put them around where they want, and nobody's going to notice. If 3% of the people voted for Jill Stein or Gary Johnson, and 2% of those votes are moved around to Gary Johnson and Jill Stein aren't going to back and say, we need a recount. But that's enough to win a state. And this is what happens. So I really believe that the only thing, and the other analogy I used is a poker table. If you sit down at the poker table and you don't know who's counting the chips, and it's all done behind a screen, and the dealer says, I'm going to count the chips onto the table, and if you vote there, that's not saying you value your money. If you play that game, you're not saying, oh, that's because I value my money. It's because you're willing to throw it away. You don't value your money. The only way you could show your value in your money is to not sit at that table. And what they want you to do is sit at that table.
Right.
And what I think really we need, and the left has to talk about this, we got to have any kind of functioning democracy, and therefore any kind of change, possibility of nonviolent change of any kind, social democratic. I want the revolution and seize the means of production, but I'd like to have a single payer health care. And if there's any way to do that, first of all, you have to mobilize in the streets, and that'll work if you do it well enough. But you need to be able to have political expression in the legislature, especially. And so we have to change the electoral system. And I think the only effective way to use our votes now would be a strike, a boycott. But it has to be an organized, mass nationwide boycott of the presidential election system. The local elections do have it, but the presidential election system, elections especially, are so corrupt and so stupid that we should be out there using that as an opportunity to demand changes in the election system, from the Electoral College, to voter suppression and election integrity with the voting machines. That would be an organizing principle, an organizing demand that would attract a lot of people, not just leftists. And that really is that's the strongest thing you can do with your vote, is not give it to them when they want. Right. The best thing we're going to get out of a presidential election in this country is that 25% of the people vote. Then you're hurting them. Then they can't claim they represent anybody.
Well, yeah, the government at that point loses legitimacy.
Exactly.
I mean, that's what we call it when it happens in another country.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And that's what they want you to do. They want you to vote to give the system legitimacy, not because they think it's going to make any difference who you vote for, but because they want you to sit at that table so the dealer can say, you see, these guys sat down and played. They gave us their money. They must think we're okay. So this is what they're doing. This is what the presidential election system, certainly, and the general election system, but they're, local races are, a little easy to oversee. But we need, and it's a big task because it's constitutional. You got 52 different states that run 52 different elections. You have the Electoral College, which really, has to be abolished or overcome. This is a prerequisite that we have to understand how badly this is corrupted and how useless it is for us in the present form. And we should go after, and we get a lot of people involved in that. You get a lot of people involved in that, not just leftists, not just progressives, not just everybody can understand this, And so I don't know. That to me, that's the strongest thing we could do with our vote in the electoral system is not use it. But it has to be organized and it has to be masked. Would be demonstrating at polling places, not to stop people from voting, but to say we didn't vote and here's why. Be public about it and have a movement around it. I think that would be a good thing to do, but nobody on the left talks about that. So
no. All I'm hearing is how we need to suck it up and vote for Joe, and that sort of thing, one way or another. But one thing I read just this week, I don't know if you're familiar with Stephen Salida. He wrote an article this week on Sanders and Palestine and the whole campaign, where he says, I'll quote a little bit, electioneering requires compromise, but compromise isn't a neutral practice. The people are made to sacrifice for the affluent. That's how compromise works under capitalism. Electoralism is salted against insurgency. It's not a space for ideas, for creativity, for the simple decency of not asking the least powerful among us to defer their freedom. It's hostile to anything that impedes the reproduction of orthodoxy. We sacrifice for the affluent. That's what happens in our system.
Yes. It's always compromise. It's always people from the more progressive positions who end up having to compromise. We got to recognize this too. It's the Democratic Party that is the main obstacle.
Right.
And I'll say it again. It's the main obstacle. And that's the reason why is because look at the demographics. No Republican should ever be able to win a presidential nomination. And they haven't. Donald Trump lost by 3 million votes.
Right.
I mean, the demographics are such. The Electoral College won it for him in a certain sense. So the demographics are such. The Democrats should win every presidential. But more than that, we know what the Republicans stand for. They're going to block everything they can block. But if you had an opposition party that really stood for things and really wanted to get them done, the Republicans could not stop it. The Democrats would get a massive public support for single-payer health care. That was stopped by the Democrats. It was stopped by Obama in 2009 with a veto-proof Congress that he ruled off the table single-payer health care because of the Democrats, because of right-wing Democrats. It was the Democrats who are stopping single-payer health care now. If they had pushed for this throughout this election campaign. And in this context, the Republicans couldn't stop it. And they would win an overwhelming majority of the Congress and the presidency. The Republicans cannot stop a party that would actually be pushing for real social democratic demands. And that means publicizing them. And that means using their aligned media to explain to people about them instead of using their aligned media to block them. To, how are you going to pay for that? No, what do you do with this? And what about, this is what they did. So we have to recognize what we're seeing before our eyes and what we saw in this campaign more than anything else. They just spent the primary focus, principal policy focus of the Democratic Party during this primary season was to prevent Medicare for all, was to stop single-payer health care from coming into being. The Republicans didn't do that. Donald Trump, in fact, is saying he's giving Medicare for all who have coronavirus. So, which we should be, if the Democrats, they would jump on that. It's a great idea. We've got to extend it to everybody. They don't even recognize that it happened. They won't even, because they're afraid of even saying it happened.
Right.
They spent this that was their primary focus, was stopping Medicare. That's incredibly horrific to think about that. That's what this party wanted to do. And that's the only reason, it had to focus, coalesce around somebody to stop that. And they did it around Biden. And that's the only issue that he had was, I'm going to not be,
I'm going to beat him.
For all. And it's incredible that we would allow. So it's the Democratic Party that is the main obstacle to important social progressive programs. And they kill them by embracing them and co-opting them and killing them within the Democratic Party. And that's why we have to push for those programs outside of any party. If you have the wave, if you have the popular support, if you ignore and attack, and they know they're going to lose your vote, anybody, whether Republican or Democrat, they'll vote for it. You'll get the votes for it. You get the votes in Congress, you get the votes in the Senate, the president will go along with it, and the Supreme Court will approve it. That's what will happen. If you don't do that, and you go into the Democratic Party and try and persuade them to do X, Y, and Z, you'll spend 10 years getting nothing done, and it'll be a disgrace. And so this is what's happened. We can see this. We just saw this in the space of a few months work out. The Democratic Party revealed itself in the most obvious way as the main obstacle to the most elementary, easiest to sell, politically advantageous social program you could have. They would guarantee victory if they embraced Medicare for all. Guarantee. And they won't do it.
Won't do it. Nope. At the risk of getting too optimistic here, I'm going to try out one of my pet theories on you, which is that there's one positive thing you can say about the Trump presidency, and that is that it exposes the rot at the core of our nation's political and economic and cultural life so that the whole world can see. We can't hide anymore. We don't have anybody with smooth rhetoric like Barack Obama. The government is no longer pretending to care about the needs of the people or stand up for human rights. No. They're obviously don't give a crap. And they will tell you that to your face about our citizens, certainly about other nations or their citizens. And it seems to me that this, on the international side, this is moving nations away from the U.S. and toward alliance with other nations like Russia and China and so forth, who are better partners. Does this Trump level of brutality, or whatever you want to call it, create an opening here in the United States that could be exploited?
Again, the problem is it could have, it should have. It could have, it should have. But what have we had from the quote-unquote opposition over the last 4 years? Not what you said, which I agree with. This demonstrates how screwed up our system is. Trump is the epitome, and taking it to the logical conclusion, all kinds of fucked up, if I can say that, things about that we see in the system. And this coronavirus crisis is the exact exemplar of that. We don't have a healthcare system. Again, the public healthcare system, it's a disgrace. It's horrible. And we're trying to patch things up that should be standard practice. People should be able to go to the doctor. You can't get a test. And if you can get a test, you can't afford it. And, can you get taken care of? And it exposes everything that's wrong with the privatized healthcare system in the United States of America. Hospitals are closing and firing people because they're not making enough money on elective surgeries. They're in a crisis. They're firing doctors and nurses. This is crazy capitalism in healthcare that everybody can see. But are they talking about that? Is the opposition and the opposition media talking about that? What are they talking about? Donald Trump, Donald Trump, Donald Trump, Donald Trump, 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 Trump. They spent the past 4 years, from the 24 hours after the election, they said, we're going to go after Trump. We're going to blame it on Russia. It was on Trump. It was on Russia. Everything that the entire discourse, you turn on CNN and MSNBC, all they're talking about is Donald Trump. They're not talking about the system in the United States of America or what's wrong. They have spent 4 years building up a cartoon story of Donald Trump as the arch villain, and whoever runs against him, therefore you have to. That's what they did this for.
Right.
They prepared for the ground for 2020. The problem in this country is Donald Trump, and Donald Trump is one of the least of the problems in this country. Frankly, he really is. The people around him, the Republicans around him, the national security apparatus around him, the Republican legislators who are passing they're all a problem. And the system that gives rise to all of this is a problem. But there's no talking about it. Instead, you just it's all focused on Donald Trump. It's ad hominem. It's personalized. It's a narrative that's silly and cartoonish. It's either Putin is evil or Donald Trump is evil, and we got to go after. And these are the problems. And as a result, if things aren't changing. And I said in 2016 when I was surprised that Trump was elected, that's kind of the typical kind of leftist response. Oh, good, he's going to screw things up so much that now there's going to be a reaction. But I said at the time, what I'm really afraid of is, no, the reaction is going to be, we got to get back to a Democrat.
Yeah, one thing, though, that does happen, I think, at least during the Obama administration happened, is that the movements, whether it's the anti-war movement or any other kind of movements of people out in the streets, it's pretty much disappeared, because we had elected our Democrat, and he was going to take care of everything for us, and we didn't need to worry. As soon as Trump got inaugurated, they were back in the street. But
what were they in the streets for? They were in the streets for Jeff Sessions. They were in the streets to save Jeff Sessions' job. They were in the streets for Russiagate. There were huge demonstrations in Times Square singing songs about Putin and Russiagate and Mueller. Meanwhile, anti-war demonstrations disappeared because the Democrats all agree with Trump on the wars. They're Barack Obama's wars. There's Syria and Libya and, the anti-war movement disappeared, as you say, once Barack Obama became the leader of the war. And the Democrats are now more than, at least as much as the Republicans, the war party. Impeachment of Trump was about not being aggressive enough in the Ukraine with a fascist government. Somehow they concocted this notion that he's too soft on Russia, which is ridiculous. And, they want him to bring us closer to war in Russia and Syria and Ukraine. And so the Democrats are completely off the table as an anti-war party, and that's gone, and that's a good thing. But people have to notice it and have to say how bad that is.
And there's no media to tell them. There's the media that basically is an echo of the Democratic Party leadership, and then there's Fox.
Yeah. There's a Republican media and a Democratic media. That's what.
Well, that just keeps me going, doing what little bit I can do here, and I hope it keeps you going. I appreciate your taking the time with me today. Thanks again to Jim Kavanagh for joining me this week on Wider View. As always, the views expressed here are those of myself and my guests and may not reflect the views of the management of this radio station. I'm your host, Charles Dunaway. Thanks for listening to Wider View.